For Carleton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At the outset of my presentation today, I brought the House of Commons' attention to a detailed report by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in which it listed the extensive conversations, secret discussions that the Prime Minister's office had been carrying out with the former Attorney General and indirectly the former Treasury Board President about putting this whole scandal behind the government. I listed the 5 different conditions that the former Attorney General is said to have provided in exchange for her willingness to put the matter to rest. And those conditions were the following. 1, remove the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, the now disgraced Gerald Butts. Remove the former clerk of the outgoing clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick. Both of them have been removed. Third condition was to remove senior Prime Ministerial Advisor Matthew Bouchard, whose inappropriate behavior, perhaps illegal conduct, I have chronicled for you extensively earlier today. To guarantee that the new Attorney General would not overturn the decision of the Director of Public Prosecutions and issue a deal for SNC-Lavalin to avoid criminal trial. And fifth and finally, the former Attorney General asked that the Prime Minister take responsibility for his inappropriate conduct and apologize either to caucus or to the public, or better yet, both. We know that the first 2 conditions were met. Butts and Wernick are gone, are going. But the 3 remaining conditions have not apparently been met. Matthew Bouchard, the senior advisor, remains. The Prime Minister has not committed, not guaranteed, that he will avoid further interference in granting SNC-Lavalin a special deal to avoid trial. And finally, perhaps most importantly, the Prime Minister has not taken responsibility for his conduct. He has not apologized. He has not held himself to account. This, at the same time as he has punished the whistleblowers for speaking out. Today, the former Treasury Board President, MP for Markham Stouffville, appeared in an interview with Anna Maria Tremonti, a CBC reporter. And Tremonti confirms that this secret negotiations were going on. I quote from her, we just learned last night on CBC News that there were secret discussions to broker a compromise with the former Attorney General before you were both removed from caucus last week. She explains. The former Treasury Board President was not able to comment on these negotiations. But she did say, and I quote, "Well, I've been very clear from the beginning of when this took place. The issue, just to remind your listeners, is that there is very good evidence that there were attempts to interfere with, have political interference with, a very serious criminal trial. I had to resign from cabinet because I was not willing to deny what took place. And from the beginning, I tried to suggest that the way to deal with this is to speak the truth, to admit that mistakes were made, to apologize to Canadians for it, and find out how it happened and make sure it never happens again. That's been my stance from the beginning, that I have communicated to the Prime Minister and his office and others. So, to the extent that there have been conversations going on, but I would not say that they were intense in any way. There were no efforts to bring all the people involved into a room together and actually resolve this. So I would say this, fairly stunned when I was expelled from caucus on Tuesday without ever having had the opportunity to speak to caucus, to share my perspective on what happened and why I resigned from cabinet, for example. She goes on in this interview to make some other very interesting observations. And I will note that though I don't share the party color or perhaps the political ideology of this particular member, she is a widely respected medical doctor, and up until her most recent political stand, someone that the government had put forward as an example of the integrity and expertise that it boasted on its front bench. So I ask Liberal members not to roll their eyes and dismiss her as though she's some sort of political enemy. She has not been a political enemy to the Liberal Party. These remarks show that she might have been the best friend the Prime Minister could ever have had if he had been willing to listen to her wise counsel that he rest himself on integrity. But he did not listen to that. Instead, he punished her for speaking truth to power. And she goes on to explain how that happened. Well, what I did, for example, I have to say, was a hard thing to do. I made the decision to resign from cabinet because there is a constitutional convention of cabinet solidarity. That means when we talk about a decision in cabinet, we may air our disagreements around the table privately, but we have to go out from that room of one mind, prepared to defend and support the decision that we have made together. And I've been able to do that on, I would have been able to do that on any other important issues that we've talked about. In this case, this is the issue at the heart of this is the issue at the heart of this is the independence of our judicial system. We cannot have a democracy without an independent justice system that is free from political interference. I felt there was evidence that there had been some attempts of interference, and the expectations of cabinet ministers to deny that interference took place and or to suggest that it didn't matter, that it wasn't important in some way, was not something I could do in good conscience. And so I could not meet my expectation of cabinet solidarity on that matter. But it was a very hard thing. You know, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but I have received some treatment which I think is less than respectful from former colleagues and lots of folks on social media and elsewhere. And you know, that's not what the story is about. I can deal with critique, but it takes a certain measure of courage to step up and do something that is going to upset others. But I believe so strongly in the importance to us, of us as a country having a system, a justice system that we can trust, to know that these decisions are not going to be made in the courts based on whether the person or the company on trial is friends with or associated with a particular politician who will plead their case. That's the fundamental issue here. And she's hit the nail on the head, Mr. Speaker. You know, a lot of people have said, this is an inside baseball story. Who could possibly make sense out of all of the intricacies of Justice Committee and Ethics Committee and deferred prosecution agreements and the Shaw-Cross Doctrine? It's all so boring. When are people's eyes going to glaze over? And what keeps shocking members of the Liberal Party is that eyes are not glazing over, that people are not losing interest in this scandal. And if the Liberals want to understand why, they need only listen to their own former Treasury Board president, because she said it here so simply. I want to say it again, what she said. But I believe so strongly in the importance of us as a country having a justice system that we can trust. to know that decisions are not going to be made in the courts based on whether the person or the company on trial is friends with or associated with a particular politician who will plead their case. That's the fundamental issue here. And that's why everybody in Canada understands and has followed this scandal so carefully. They don't need to know all of the intricacies of the Shaw Cross Doctrine. They don't need to know about how cabinet confidence works. What they do know is this, that in our system, everybody is supposed to be equal under the law, that there is no special treatment for special people or special companies, that we have the rule of law and not the law of rulers, that you can't buy justice with powerful lobbyists. That is exactly what is at stake in this particular scandal. Do we have one law for the people and another for the powerful? Everyday people on the streets understand how much we stand to lose if we normalize the process of politicians walking into the court sphere and helping special people avoid prosecution. The former Treasury Board president said, went on in the interview. She was asked by Anna Maria Tremonti, the CBC host, so do we have a justice system in Canada that is now deeply flawed? You left. You didn't get what you wanted. It didn't change. Does that mean our justice system is flawed as it stands now under this Liberal government? No. In fact, I think Canadians can be very thankful that the system did work. I believe it worked because the former Attorney General did not bend to the wishes of those who wanted her to interfere in the trial. The decision around this particular trial, the SNC-Lavalin case, it's being described by some as the largest corporate corruption trial in modern Canadian history, says the former Liberal Treasury Board president. It's not an insignificant trial in any way, she goes on. And there is a person called the Director of Public Prosecutions who is completely non-political, who has a large office of people who are trained in criminal prosecutions. She made the determination that this should go to trial. There is a tool that the former Attorney General could have used if this company qualified, but the Director of Public Prosecutions said they did not qualify for that. She goes on, there's lots of evidence as to why. We can be thankful that we did have, we can be thankful that we did not have political interference didn't occur, but it was because the former Attorney General was not willing to meddle. This goes right to the heart of one of the principal defenses that the government has so far made. They say, well, the company didn't get a special deal in the end, so none of this matters. Let's forget about it and move on. That's not because of them. It's because of one principled woman who stood in their way. And what did they do? They trampled over her. They kicked her out as Attorney General, and now they've forced her right out of the Liberal caucus. They have tried to destroy her reputation. They've sent out powerful former Liberal ministers to make racial and sexist slurs against her as part of a long-standing 2-month campaign of character assassination. But all of that said, because of her, this company did not wrongly get off without a trial. And the former Treasury Board president is quite right when she points out why. Let's just say it one more time. There's lots of evidence as to why we can be thankful that we did not have, that political interference didn't occur, but it was because the former Attorney General was not willing to meddle.
That's it.
In other words, the Prime Minister's office was over here, the Attorney General's office was over here, and farther still was the Director of Public Prosecutions. and the Prime Minister's office slammed and slammed and slammed against that wall that was the principle built in stone of the former Attorney General, and tried as they might, like a battering ram, to bust through that wall held. And on the other end of that wall was the top prosecutor of the land, whom the Prime Minister was trying to overpower, but he could not do it because he was up. The seemingly irresistible force of a Prime Minister was up against an immovable object, and that was the principled former Attorney General. So no one on that side of the House of Commons that still stands behind this Prime Minister should fool themselves into thinking that the administration of justice was protected by anything other than her principle. It is true that as of now, SNC-Lavalin is headed for a criminal prosecution. But it is not true that that has anything to do with the Prime Minister or the people around him. He did everything in his power over a steady campaign 4 months long to avoid that trial. A trial that his own former Treasury Board president says might be the biggest criminal corruption trial in Canadian history. But yet, the people who stood their ground paid the price. We know that. We've witnessed it this week. The Prime Minister has signaled how he responds when strong, principled, courageous people stand up to him and speak truth to power. Now, George Orwell said, as my friend from British Columbia recently reminded me, the further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it.
Wow.
No more appropriate words could be spoken in the House of Commons than those on this particular week. The anger and hatred that senior Liberals have shown these two courageous whistleblowers over the last 2 months demonstrates just how accurately Orwell captured the sentiment and the consequences that truth-tellers often face. But we are all blessed that they did tell the truth, that they did do their job, and that, for now, the sacred and precious and fragile gift handed down from our ancestors of an independent legal system is, in the moment, safe. I say in the moment because we don't yet know the next chapter in the story. Will the government succeed in covering up any other political interference that went on? We don't know. Will the government succeed in covering up the real motives for the Prime Minister's extraordinary defense of this accused corporate criminal? Will we ever find out who stood to benefit from the Prime Minister blocking this trial for fraud and bribery? Finally, will the trial ever actually make it to court? These delays will drag on, and maybe until after the next election. And with the Prime Minister refusing to rule out a future deferred prosecution agreement,
Shame on him.
with his current position that he's done nothing wrong, what assurance could we possibly have that he won't do it again? If he, as is his current position, believes there was nothing wrong with the 4-month campaign of pressure applied to the former Attorney General, that it was perfectly acceptable for everyone from his chief of staff to his principal secretary to the clerk of the Privy Council to his senior advisor to his finance minister to the finance minister's chief of staff, all relentlessly badgering the Attorney General to write a letter overturning the decision of the prosecutor and shelve the charges, if he thinks that all of that was perfectly appropriate, why wouldn't he just do it again? He's open to it.
He's trying. He will.
The Attorney General says he might do it. Doesn't know yet. Won't say. Thinking about it. No further comment. Thank you very much.
Cover up.
See you after the next election.
Yeah.
And do not be surprised, Mr. Speaker. Do not say I didn't warn you. If you wake up in the lead up to Christmas of this coming year, this Prime Minister is back in office, and all of a sudden, surprise, SNC-Lavalin is off the corruption charges. They get excited about that, don't they? They get excited about the prospect that SNC might get off of the crimes of fraud and bribery. That was a Liberal member who apparently takes great delight in the prospect that after the next election, the Prime Minister would step up and have his Attorney General shelve those charges so the company could get off with impunity and the Libyan people could be left to suffer in the consequences of the corruption that the company is said to have carried out. But that applause and that reaction we just witnessed in the floor of the House of Commons confirms my warning to you, Mr. Speaker, that if this Prime Minister is back in office, make no mistake, he will let SNC-Lavalin off. He will contaminate our justice system with more political interference because he has made it clear that he does not believe there is anything wrong with a Prime Minister pressuring an Attorney General to override a top prosecutor. He has made that clear. That is not my allegation. He had a chance to stand up at his February 15th press conference and state clearly and definitively that what happened was wrong. In fact, what the Treasury Board president said was her solution for him was to stand up at that same press conference and say, it was a mistake, we shouldn't have done it, we'll never ever do it again, I'm sorry.
He had an option.
But he refused to do that because he doesn't think there's anything wrong with what he did. And if he doesn't think there's anything wrong, why wouldn't he just do it again?
You had an option.
I welcome him to come before this House and tell us that he promises, put his hand, not that his promises have never meant anything in the past, but even if they did, even if we could believe them, he has not even yet promised that a future re-elected Liberal government would refrain from imposing a settlement that shelves the criminal charges into SNC-Lavalin. In other words, this is not over. This is only the beginning. The future of judicial and prosecutorial independence is very much a live issue in the coming federal election.
Very much so.
There is one leader who has thus far said that if he becomes Prime Minister, he will not interfere with his Attorney General. He will not allow for a political decision to override the prosecutor and shelve criminal charges into large-scale white-collar criminals.
Who is that?
That leader is the leader of the Conservative Party. You know what I will further say? There may be a leader of the NDP who will say the same thing, and I would welcome him. From all accounts, he is an honorable man. And the leader of the Green Party may likewise say the same thing. Our disagreements notwithstanding, she, too, is an honorable person. I believe they all will commit that if they are elected Prime Minister of Canada in October of this year, that there will be no political interference to let this large-scale accused corporate criminal off the hook. But there is one leader who has thus far refused resolutely to rule out doing that. Again. In other words, we are just at the very beginning of this debate about the future of the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. And we will have to decide as a nation whether it is acceptable for
the crony capitalists and corporatists to flood this place with lobbyists and illegal donations in order to buy themselves justice.
Unbelievable.
Any other Canadian accused of any other offense would have no political recourse against it.
Nope.
They'd have to hire a lawyer and fight the charges in front of a judge or a jury of their peers. But the Prime Minister thinks there's absolutely nothing wrong with the idea that a corporation with billions of dollars, massive influence, shareholders, lobbyists, and board members linked to power in government, using all of that influence to avoid repercussions in our criminal justice system. He thinks that is perfectly fine. And he believes that that decision should reside with his office, not with an independent prosecutor who is immune to political interference, not with an attorney general who is sworn to nonpartisanship, but with him, with a prime minister with the most political office in all of the land. You see, he is creating a justice system based on who you know.
That's right.
In the PMO.
Exactly.
Same old liberal.
Where there's one set of rules for the people and another set of rules for the powerful. Where he replaces the rule of law with the law of rulers. We have to remember just how fragile a gift we have inherited. We are among the blessed few born in a democracy with an independent system that judges the guilt or innocence of people in the court of law and carries out that judgment independent from political decisions.
That's right.
Billions of people around the world would literally give their lives for the chance that their children might live in such a country as ours. 300,000 people a year arrive on our shores, the largest sustained rate of immigration of any country in the world, because people flee from places where politicians decide who faces trial and who walks free. These people come here because they heard and they understood that in Canada it was different.
That's right.
That everybody is equal under the law and no one is above the law.
Not anymore.
They understood those many newcomers who came to our shores and enriched our country, that we had a long-standing and apparently durable tradition of judicial and prosecutorial independence that developed over more than 800 years from the time of the Magna Carta in Great Britain, the mother country of our parliamentary and legal system. They knew that at the moment that King John signed that parchment, he was committing himself to being under the law, not above the law. And that meant that henceforward, the king, all of the crown, and those inside the court, all those inside the court of the crown would be subjected to the same treatment. No matter their name, their title, their lineage, their wealth, their race, their religion, people understood that when they come to Canada, they will be treated as equals. That protection of that principle is what is at stake in SNC-Lavalин's corruption scandal. Are we going to hold this company accountable just like any other Canadian would face accountability if charged with a crime? Or are we going to allow backroom meetings by lobbyists and insiders with political decision makers in this Liberal Prime Minister's government to extend a special deal to avoid trial and dodge accountability? That is what we're debating here today. So when I hear the cries of those on the other side that we should just move on and forget about this and get back to talking about something else. Hey, didn't you hear we spent $41 billion the other day in the budget? Can't we talk about all that deficit spending, they cry? Oh, we'll have time for that. They'll be held accountable for all the money they've squandered and the debt that they've piled up and the taxes they've raised on the working class people to pay for it. There will be plenty of time for that accountability, I assure them, and we will welcome that debate with relish. But they can spray dollar signs in all directions all they want. We will not be distracted in our role of official opposition. We will show up here every day and do our jobs of protecting the rule of law, the system of justice, the equality of people. We will do that here, today, and every day, and we will never apologize for doing it. They can cry and they can howl and they can scream on the other side of the floor as they're now doing, begging, pleading for silence, but we will not be silent. We will continue to speak up. We will defend the principles that made this country great. We will remember that when we look at the green on the ground here, that it represents the fields in which the original commoners met to fight for their rights. We will remember that this is the house of the common people.
I see the honourable member for Timmins James Bay on a point of order.
Speaker, I came in during the beginning of that speech and I wasn't quite sure exactly what it had to do with the budget, so I'm just asking if the member will back up a little bit and explain to us how this does actually have anything to do with what we've been talking about. I didn't want to miss the point, so I just want to make sure for the honourable members who were confused like me.
Order. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay, order. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay will know that the rules of relevance as it relates to budget debates are quite vast, and will allow the honourable member for Carleton to wrap up. Just about 1 minute or so remaining before we need to interrupt before member statements. The honourable member for Carleton.
Out of respect for the honourable member who missed the beginning of my speech, I will start over again.
Let's hear it again.
Very beginning. And I ask, Mr. Speaker, that you put aside the normal rules of decorum to allow the member to bring popcorn into the House of Commons, because I promise it's going to be one hell of a show.
I naturally